people wore their hair and how they brushed their teeth. We know what clothes they wore on top and what they wore beneath. We know how people ate their food and on what sort of plate. 'Cause Gerald rode on Wales in 1188.
You know they did in Barcelona, but often washed their feet. That's how they paid the troops and how they took their meat. You know that people took the cross and how they met the fates. When Gerald rode on Wales in 1188.
We know that if you had the flu, you couldn't take a pill. The thing the doctors gave to you could make you much more ill. We know that even then the roads were in a dreadful state when Gerald rode on Wales in 1188. This is the story of Gerald's journey around Wales. Unfortunately, it's in Latin, and I don't speak Latin, but I can write my name. Of course, Gerald wouldn't have gone on this journey at all if it wasn't for the Crusades. I can tell you all about it, because I was there. That's Gerald. I know, because 800 years ago, I was his page. Gerald was an important priest and politician, and he wanted to travel around Wales to persuade people to join the Crusades. But for that, you need an archbishop, preferably of Canterbury. Our Archbishop of Canterbury was called Baldwin. Baldwin had been asked by King Henry II to find soldiers to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. Of course, if you're going on any journey, you need transport. This was 1188. And you need provisions. Provisions for Gerald, provisions for the Archbishop, and provisions for the page. These are optional. And so we set off. From Radnor, past Hay, and Brecon. People were very keen to join the Crusades. Gerald gave a lot of speeches. Most of them in Latin. And a lot of people decided to take the cross. Taking the cross means wearing a cross. That's what you do when you vow to go on a holy crusade to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. It was a man's life in the Crusades. You learned how to handle the latest weapons. It was an adventure. You got to see the world. This world. And the next. And so we travelled all the way around South Wales. We always took the quickest route, even if it meant going through quicksand. But fortunately, nobody was hurt. At night, we stayed in castles like Swansea, or Kidwelly, or in abbeys like Margam. And sometimes we slept in people's houses. And so we came through the land ruled by the most powerful prince in Wales, Rhys ap Griffith. Rhys was a cousin of Gerald's, and Gerald thought he might persuade Rhys to join the Crusades. Perhaps his sons would go too. But Rhys' sons would rather kill each other than kill Saracens in the Middle East. In Haverfordwest, Archbishop Baldwin gave a long sermon. He said, every sinner deserved to go to hell. Some would burn, some would freeze, some would be eaten by hungry worms, and some would be sawn in half. Every man was a sinner, and sinners could only go to heaven if they agreed to take the cross. Even thieves and murderers would be forgiven. Sometimes Baldwin had to use an interpreter. Sinners of Haverfordwest and outlying districts as far as Carmarthen, come on down! A lot of people came forward to take the cross. But some of the women didn't want their husbands to leave them. Gerald said the Crusades were a holy mission, and that God would punish those who opposed it. And sure enough, that night, the woman turned over in bed and flattened her son. We stayed at Rhys's castle at Cardigan. Rhys's court was well ordered. It even had a falconer and a dung collector. Rhys was extremely hospitable. We were given water to wash our feet. Our guards hung up their weapons, and the steward conducted us to the main hall to eat. People were seated according to their rank. The important people sat next to Rhys. There was a fire in the middle of the hall, but no chimney, only a hole in the roof, and the lighting was very subtle. Rhys had his own candle holder, and according to the laws of Howell the Good, he was entitled to Rhys's leftovers. And to bite the top of the candle. The laws were very complicated. Some people were entitled to the king's mantle, others to the queen's handkerchief. Rhys laid on some fine entertainment. He was fond of music, whether it was played on the harp, the crwth, or the pibgorn. Rhys had held one of the first Eisteddfodau. We all agreed we had heard nothing like it before. Rhys had his own jester. And after dinner, the court poet recited a composition in praise of Rhys's noble deeds. The song clearly went to Rhys's head. Gerald thought it would be a good time to ask Rhys if he would do more noble deeds and go to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. Rhys said he would love to, only he couldn't leave his dear wife Gwen Llian. But he hoped there'd still be a place for his sons. Soon it was time to go to sleep. There wasn't much privacy. Everyone slept in the same bed, which was stuffed with rushes. For bedtime reading, Baldwin read The Topography of Ireland. It was Gerald's favourite book. He wrote it himself. When the watchman sounded the bell, it was time to put the lights out. We needed our sleep. It had been a long, tiring day. A very tiring day. It was an even longer night. I was afraid to go to sleep. In medieval Wales, they didn't have alarm clocks. So in the morning, we were woken by a cockerel. We got up and cleaned our teeth with hazel shoots and rubbed them with an old woolen cloth. But it made our teeth shine like ivory. Then we were ready to set out on our journey. Gerald and Baldwin wanted to visit cathedrals, monasteries and abbeys. There were over 40 abbeys in Wales. We had passed Llantoni Priory, Margam Abbey, monasteries at St. Dogmael's in Whitland, and we stayed in the abbey at Strata, Florida. If you're on a pilgrimage, a holy mission, or simply old and sick, you're always welcome at an abbey, especially if you had an archbishop with you. Gerald was a monk himself. I liked to visit monasteries. Gerald had always wanted to be a priest. He learned to read and write in a monastery, and his great ambition was to become Archbishop of St. David's. And it was in the monastery that he became interested in one of his favourite hobbies, collecting tithes. Tithes were a sort of tax. Everyone had to give a tenth of what they earned to the church, and Gerald was very keen to make sure that they did. Of course, other people had different reasons for wanting to become a monk. Gerald told us about a man called Elidir. who spent most of his youth underground with the fairies. But eventually, he grew too big to live with the fairies. But when he saw the world above ground, he was so disappointed. So he became a monk. And then Gerald told us another story about a man who was locked in an embrace with a beautiful woman. When she suddenly turned into a hairy beast, he ran straight off and became a monk. And I don't blame him at all. Of course, monasteries were always open to people in need. Gerald used to tell a lot of stories about people having a hard time, whether they were tied up in a bag, being eaten by toads, or found that your hand was stuck to a pillar in St. David's Church, or even if you were a knight, giving birth to a calf. Gerald thought it was a punishment from God. Of course, in those days, even the nicest people might turn out to be demons. There were demons and spirits everywhere. Gerald said that an unclean spirit could tear off your clothing, item by item. Even a locked door was no protection against an unclean spirit. When we arrived at Strata, Florida, a monk showed us to our quarters, past the refectory, past the library, and past the lavatorium. Abbeys might take as long as 30 years to build, and Strata, Florida wasn't finished yet. The masons were still at work. They used people they knew as models. Rees paid for the monastery to be built. He thought that was one way of making sure he got to heaven. The monks would be so grateful, they'd pray for him. Strata, Florida had its own share of saintly relics. These were usually the bones of great saints. People believed that these relics had miraculous healing powers. Of course, abbeys are run by monks, and monks belong to all sorts of different orders. Brother Gwilym is a Cistercian, and Gwilym is wearing a natty little number in Frou Frou Hessian. Like most Cistercians, Gwilym likes going to Mass, coming back from Mass, and building monasteries in damp, unpleasant locations where he wouldn't be tempted to do anything silly. Brother Gilbert is a Carthusian, and Gilbert is sporting a handsome hair shirt with a matching canvas outfit. Discomfort guaranteed. His interests include taking vows of silence, fasting to the point of death, and generally having a very bad time of it. Brother Benedict is a Benedictine, and Benedict is wearing a versatile black outfit in fully fitted hemp. His hobbies include praying for the dead, praying for the living, and singing songs. In a few hundred years, he hopes to invent a famous liqueur. The monks at Strata, Florida were Cistercians. The monks were made to work very hard, in the fields, or helping their fellow monks inside. Monks had to follow strict rules. When they weren't working, they spent their lives in prayer and worship. They had to say Mass at all hours of the day and night. Matins were between midnight and 2 o'clock. Prime was at 6 o'clock. And then chapter Mass was at 8 o'clock after breakfast. If you fell asleep, a monk would wake you up by shining a light in your eyes. After High Mass at 11, everybody went to lunch. Because everyone ate with their fingers, the monks washed their hands in the lavatorium before every meal. But they only took a bath 3 or 4 times a year. Whilst we were eating, a monk read from a religious book. You weren't allowed to interrupt the reading with any sort of noise. After 3 days, we left Strata, Florida, and traveled north. We knew we'd be welcome at other monasteries, because they were always open to people in need. Earlier, we had passed Llandewi Brevi, where a mound had risen up while St. David was preaching. It was a case of making a mountain out of a molehill. Now we were heading further north, trying to persuade people to go on the Crusades. Meanwhile, in Palestine, the Saracens believed they would go to heaven if they died fighting crusaders. And the crusaders were told they would go to heaven if they died fighting Saracens. Heaven was going to be very crowded. Do you think God would punish someone for making a noise at mealtime or falling asleep in the middle of Mass? I don't think so. I hope not anyway. I wouldn't want to give birth to a cow. When we got to North Wales, the roads became steeper and steeper and steeper. The weather wasn't too good either. Gerald said it was curious that the nightingale never visited Wales. Baldwin said it was a clever move on the part of the nightingale. This was his one joke of the whole journey. Baldwin thought that the bad weather would be good training for the Crusades. It must have been the wrong sort of training, because Baldwin died in Palestine, outside the gates of Acre. At Nevin, we found shelter for the night. The houses are made of wattle, twigs and mud. They were only built to last a couple of years. Ordinary people led simple lives in those days. They didn't have much furniture. Gerald said in this part of the world, the air blew straight from Ireland. The air was so poor that nobody died of anything other than old age. In Anglesey, Gerald persuaded many of the common people to take the cross. But sometimes their clothes were so threadbare that the cross came straight off again. And it was in Anglesey that we found a stone which would return to the same place, however far away you took it. To test it, they chained it to a large boulder and cast it far out to sea. And sure enough, the stone returned to the place it had come from. It was also said that if any couple fondled each other near the stone, great drops of sweat would drip from it. Compared with most of Wales, Anglesey was very fertile. Gerald remarked that the Welsh ploughed a field by pulling the plough backwards. This had its dangers. In those days, medicine was very primitive. Their equipment, well, it wasn't very sophisticated, and sometimes the cures were worse than the complaint. For an eye wound, the treatment was a burn between the eyebrow and the back of the neck. And for swellings, the best thing was to put a plucked cockerel on the wound. For head wounds, it was best to open up the skull and apply herbs. But the general cure for most ailments was to have your blood drawn and sucked by a leech. Of course, it wasn't everyone who could afford a doctor. Most people had to rely on holy relics like St. Keirig's staff. If you paid a penny, it would cure you of all sorts of things. Gerald said that if you cheated and only paid half a penny, you'd only be half cured. After we left Anglesey, we crossed the Conway and went to Rhuddlan Castle. Wales was a divided nation. The princely families were always fighting each other and marrying each other. But Gerald thought little of women. He said that a woman's hair was a snare for the feeble-minded. Welsh women wore their hair short. Not far from Rhuddlan was a spring. People said that it ebbed and flowed with the tide. Strange what you find, isn't it? Of course, in those days, people were very superstitious. They'd believe anything. People believed that there were 32 days in the year that were dangerous. One of them was the 16th of September. Another was the 26th of July. people also believed you could tell the weather by examining a ram's shoulder. If you were a bit more scientific, you would go and see a soothsayer. There were plenty of them in Wales. People thought that soothsayers were possessed by devils. When you asked them something, they immediately lost control of their senses, and words would stream out of their mouths. Usually, you couldn't understand what they were saying, and then the only way to stop them was to shake them very hard. And so, we rode back to Hereford, and our journey around Wales came to an end. Sometimes, I think Gerald, well, I think he hadn't enjoyed it very much. Some of the things he wrote about the Welsh in his book were not very nice. He said they didn't keep their promises, and that they lived off plunder. And that they were sunk in a deep abyss of every vice, perjury, theft, and adultery. But then, Gerald didn't have very nice things to say about the Normans either, or the Anglo-Saxons. He complained that the Norman kings abused the church. I think Thomas of Becket would have agreed with him. He was Archbishop of Canterbury until Henry II had him bumped off. And he said the Germans and Anglo-Saxons were disdainful and cold. Well, because of the frozen polar regions that lay adjacent to them. The important thing was that our journey had been a success. 3,000 people had taken the cross. But not all of them went to the Crusades. Some people paid to be released from their vow. And some of those who had sworn they would not turn back until they reached Jerusalem turned back before they got to Palestine. Gerald didn't go to the Crusades. He stayed at home and wrote books. He gave 6 of his books to the Pope. He was told that the Pope kept them beside his bed. Gerald started to write the story of his life. It is going to be 200 chapters long. He died in 1223, 181 chapters too early. Nobody knows the end, only me.
We know how people wore their hair.